Hello, everybody, and a very warm welcome to this event for the Lockdown LitFest, where I am really honoured to be. I'm not going to spare his blushes, but I'm honoured to be in the presence of somebody who is something of a hero to me. Our guest today knows oceans. He was the first to complete a long-distance swim in every ocean of the world and has pioneered more swims around famous landmarks than any other person in history. He swam across the icy waters of the North Pole to highlight the melting of the Arctic sea ice, and across the glacial lake on Mount Everest to draw attention to the impact of climate change on the Himalayan glaciers. It was there he met his first yak, which led to his fantastic book title, 21 Yaks and a Speedo. He swam the North Pole, he swam the English Channel. No, not sideways, lengthways, from Cornwall up to London. He is, I'm going to say this, he's the only person I'm aware of to have ever passed the British Army's Special Forces, the SAS selection, on a rather forbidden third attempt. He is an extraordinary person. He's United Nations Patron of the Oceans. Would you please give a very warm welcome to Lewis Pugh. Lewis, it's very nice to see you. Thank you for joining us at the Lockdown LitFest. First of all, how are you? You and your wife, all well?
All well. Thank you so much. And thank you for the opportunity to speak to your audience. Thank you.
Well, it's our pleasure. And just tell us, where in the world are you? Where are we speaking to you from?
I'm at the bottom of Africa, near the Cape of Good Hope, Cape Town.
Good place to be. And given that you spend most of your time being one of the world's finest, if not the world's finest aquanaut, has lockdown affected your ability to train, to swim, to get in the water, your natural environment?
Yes, it's extraordinary. You know, so many other sports have been allowed to be undertaken during the lockdown. The one which has been banned almost worldwide has been swimming. So since January, I haven't actually been in the oceans. It's one thing that I have learned. I always knew I loved swimming, but now I know I absolutely adore swimming. Not being able to swim for such a long period of time has been challenging.
Let's go to the little reference. Let's sort of start. I just want to do a little voyage around your career and what got you to this point. The reference I made to British Special Forces, the SAS and selection, famously, it's tough. Obviously, it's tough. And famously, if you fail on the first attempt of selection, you get RTU'd, return to unit. If you fail on the second attempt, you get RTU'd. There are no third attempts, except for you. How did this come about?
Yeah, so it's exactly as the way you say it. You're given 2 goes. If you don't pass on the second go, and many people don't go for a second go because it is very robust. So normally people, if they fail on the first go, they then go back to their original regiment or corps. I did it on the second go and I failed. I didn't make the final tests. And so the colonel of the regiment called me in. He said, "You're going to be sent back to your regiment." And I stood there and I said, "Please give me another go." Both reasons why I was kicked off the course have been, I don't think, my fault. And so please, would you give me another go? And a decision which for him was, neither here nor there, for me was absolutely life-changing. Because then I joined the regiment, and the lessons that you learn there, certainly in the work which I do when I'm in a polar region, lessons you learn in the Special Air Service are absolutely excellent for anything in the polar regions.
We'll talk about the lessons learned and how you apply them in terms of finding a crack team, building a crack team, being very highly motivated towards a specific mission objective. But I'm going to take you back to 1986, when Lewis was 17 years old, and you took your first swimming lesson, your first real swimming lesson. You come from a Royal Naval family, if memory serves. Your dad was in the Royal Navy. Tell us how that came about. Not the Royal Navy bit, but the swimming lesson. But
yes, I grew up in Plymouth, obviously in England, and I moved around a number of different Royal Navy bases, Plymouth, Portsmouth, Malta. But my first proper swimming lesson was when I went out to South Africa. So when my father retired, his mother was South African, and he always wanted to retire there. We moved out to South Africa. We moved to Cape Town. My high school classroom overlooked the Atlantic Ocean. And I actually can't remember the ignition of what it was that got me into the ocean. But our PT lessons were they were never sort of rugby or cricket or anything like that. It was run down to the beach, play touch rugby, and then go for a swim. And I absolutely loved it. And from my history classroom, from the corner of my history classroom, I could see Robben Island. And one day I decided I wanted to swim Robben Island. I went and got myself lessons. And then about a month later, I stood on Robben Island, looked out back towards Cape Town, and dived in and went for it.
And this is a month after your first official swimming lesson. You swam was it from Robben Island back to shore or to Robben Island?
No, I swam from Robben Island back to shore, and it was, it was an amazing time in the history of South Africa, because remember, at that time it was still a prison. I remember arriving at the islands, being escorted by jailers, armed, down to a beach. On the beach, there were political prisoners who were cleaning kelp off that beach. I stood there, I stripped down to my Speedo, and I started to swim back to Cape Town. Two things that I really remember about that swim. The first was the political prisoners and how blissfully unaware I was of what they were going through at the time. Obviously, it was apartheid South Africa. I was at an all-white school. The second thing I remember distinctly was on the beach. So not only was there kelp on the beach, but there were thousands and thousands of these beautiful little African penguins. Absolutely amazing. You go back there today and you see very, very few. So just in that short period of time, 33 odd years, how the environment has changed, both politically and environmentally.
I'm always interested in those hinge points in people's life where they find the passion, whether it's writers finding, excuse me 1 second, I'm just going to shut this door. I do apologize, everybody, but there's a howling wolf outside the door. That should be better. I do apologize. I'm so sorry for that, but no noise is off. I'm interested in the hinge points in people's life where suddenly they find the passion, they find the thing. Sometimes it's with writers who find the voice. Can you tell us what it felt like having completed the swim from Robben Island, as you get to the shore and you realize something's changed inside you, that there's no going back now?
It's interesting how I remembered it then and how I remember it now. I'll never ever forget arriving at Cape Town Beach at the end. So it was a beach called Bloberg Beach, because I barely made the swim. The first hour was fine. By the end of the second hour, I was absolutely frozen. I was very, very thin in those days. At 2.5 hours, I thought there's no ways I'm going to make it. But I then changed from crawl into breaststroke, and it was literally taking 10 strokes at a time, taking a deep breath and then carrying on. But eventually, finally, I got there. I put my feet down on the sand. I've been swimming now for 33 years. I've done some very big swims, but nothing felt quite as wonderful and as glorious as putting my feet down there on the sand. It was magnificent. A number of years later, though, I was invited to go onto Robben Island. I was invited to go there with a man called Ahmed Kathrada, who had been a political prisoner with Nelson Mandela. He took me onto the island. He took me into his cell, and he showed me around. And I was so struck by what he said. He, for those of you who've been to the cell, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's very, very small. Above, there were two small, tiny, thin grey government blankets on the ground. There was a small bucket for ablution. There was a small window with 3 bars. And I stood in there and I looked at him and I said, Ahmed, what was it like in this cell? And all he could say to me was, he could just say, it was cold. He said that cold wind coming in off the Atlantic Ocean, cold showers, cold waters, cold food. He said, it's almost as if cold has actually permeated my very bones. And he said, and if I'm honest with you, Lewis, I've never, ever quite warmed up.
Oh my God.
And, I then began to realize what it must have been like for them to have seen a young white boy walk up onto the beach, get into his Speedo, and then swim to freedom.
It's hard to follow that, actually, Lewis. Let's talk about cold. More recently, I haven't mentioned, but you swam the South Pole, which puts you in critical danger, life-threatening danger. Can you tell us what the motivation was to swim the South Pole? and we'll put up or we'll share a link to some of the images on your website, just the astonishing images of you getting into the water, wearing nothing but a pair of goggles and a Speedo, getting into this water that is so crystal blue, it looks like it's painted or photoshopped, wedged between two sheets of ice. By way of a question, sorry, you'd rather throw me with your last answer. I'm putting myself in a cell in Robben Island, which I have no right to do. But can you tell us why you were doing it and what it feels like the minute or two before you are about to enter water that can kill you?
Yeah. It's a feeling like you never have. You're putting yourself into harm's way. And just to explain what the temperature of the water is, so this photograph is in East Antarctica. So if you go from Cape Town and you go directly south, eventually, when you look out of the window of your plane, 4 hours later, you'll see little icebergs, and then eventually you'll see the sea ice. And then in the distance, you'll see the incredible, beautiful mountains of East Antarctica. And what you'll also see is everywhere, you'll see these large pools of water appearing on top of the East Antarctica ice sheet. So I went down there to undertake a swim in one of these pools of water to graphically show world leaders how the Antarctic is melting, just like the Arctic is melting. So back in 2007, I had done the first swim across the North Pole. I was now down in Antarctica, not quite at the South Pole, but close to the South Pole, doing this swim. And what I found when we landed there and I looked around the terrain was actually not only were there these pools of water on top, but there were also rivers flowing underneath the East Antarctic ice sheet. And so I decided to really show world leaders what was happening was to undertake a swim down one of these rivers. The water is just above 0 degrees. I've got ice to the right of me. I've got ice to the left of me. I've got ice underneath me. I'm in freezing cold water. And most importantly, you've got ice above you. And that's what's so dangerous, is because ice, obviously, if it melts, it falls. And I had done a number of test swims during the week before the main swim. And now I'm standing there about to enter that tunnel. And it's very easy to start thinking of all the things that are going to go wrong. And one has to forget about the past. One has to forget about the future. You just have to be absolutely present right now. And these are the actual goggles which I used during the swim. I don't know if you can see those well. Yeah. But I remember taking the goggles and then slowly putting them onto my face. And I listened to music. And then I've now got to commit. And I've got to commit 100%. And one realizes that if something goes wrong, so if ice falls, you cannot swim up a river again. And that is where you will die. And I just had to try to get that out of my mind. And so things sort of slow down. I've done the training, I've done the preparation, and now I've just got to pray that everything's going to be okay. And all I could think of is because Antarctica is so far away. It's 4,000 kilometers away from South Africa. It's 15,000 kilometers away from Moscow. And you ask me, well, why would I talk about Moscow? Well, because this part of Antarctica we're trying to protect, and 23 nations have agreed to protect it. Just 2 more countries have got to agree to protect it. And then we'll create the biggest protected area in the world. And it's just Russia and China which still have to agree to this. And so cold water swimming is a language which Russians understand. There's beauty in struggle. There's something about cold water swimming which resonates deep with Russian people. There's one sport which every single Russian person has done as a young boy, as a young girl. Their parents would have taken them into very, very cold places and made them swim across a lake or in the sea. And all I could think as I stood there in East Antarctica was, if I don't stand up here and protect this place and get this out into the international media, who is going to? Put the goggles on, I dived in, and I went for it. And fortunately, no ice fell on my head, but it was singly the most beautiful place I've ever been in the whole world by a big distance.
deathly beauty. I have to pick on one thing. You said you listened to music just before you enter the water. What do you listen to?
It's interesting. So I had a Russian. The team was made up of people from many different nations. I had a Russian there, a man called Slava Fetisov, who was a former ice hockey player. He is one of the most famous people in Russia. He would be to Russia what Muhammad Ali would have been to America. So a huge name and a person who has now become very passionate about protecting the polar regions. He was my second during the swim. And then I also had Jose Maria Figueres, who was the president of Costa Rica, former president of Costa Rica. And so I took my phone, and it just sounds so weird to say it now about what music I played, but you can plan what music you're going to play. But actually, when you're there at the moment, you just got to go with whatever feels good and motivating. And I just flicked through my songs. I had put the Costa Rican national anthem on my phone. I played the Costa Rican national anthem. I played the Russian national anthem. And then it came to Britain, so I may have a South African accent, but I'm British. And for some reason, it felt a bit odd to play the British national anthem. And so there was some haunting music, which I absolutely love. I'd done all my training on the Isle of Lewis, and there's a beautiful song, Highland Cathedral, which is very, 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 very beautiful. And I just played that, and it just echoed out across the ice. And I just thought, this is the first time anybody must have played the bagpipes in East Antarctica.
If memory serves, did you trained with Ben Fogle for a while? You put a shout out, which I was sort of supportive of, trying to find people to train with you while you're up in Scotland. Ben Fogle, I think, answered the call. Then you trained with him. Is that right?
Yes. And what a treat it was to have him, because he's tough. He's really tough. He's also passionate about protecting the environment. He came down to the beach and he gave a speech to lots of people who arrived there about his journey in life. And his journey in life had actually started in the Outer Hebrides so many years ago.
That was a lovely moment. Okay, let's come to the meat of the matter, Lewis. That's the background, and I think everybody will now have a sense of your passion and your commitment. So that's what you do, or what you've done, some of it. Why do you do it? What are you trying to achieve? Why do you put yourself at such risk, train so hard, push so hard, work really hard to get fantastic teams around you that can facilitate the thing you want to do? Because this is not about ego, it's not about an Ironman challenge or raising money for charity, all of which are great causes, of course, but you have far, far bigger fish to fry. Terrible analogy, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. My reason is very, very simple. Our oceans are under severe threat. So in 33 years of swimming, I have seen them change, and change almost completely. And so I do these swims to highlight what is happening in the oceans, but that's the beginning part. Afterwards is the hard work, the real hard yards. Although the swimming is also hard, the real hard yards is trying to get world leaders to then protect these places. So I'm currently trying to create a series of protected areas around Antarctica. A few years ago, we were able to create a very, very big one in the Ross Sea. Now I'm trying to get 3 more of them, one in East Antarctica, one in the Weddell Sea, and then one on the Antarctic Peninsula. And that takes the time, and that is very, very difficult.
For those who don't know what a marine protected area is, can you give us a couple of stats on what it actually is?
Yep.
Do we have any in our own waters here in the UK or across Europe? And what is the benefit of a marine protected area as you know and understand it?
Yeah, so a marine protected area is it's akin to a national park on land. So it's protecting stuff in the water. And just like on land, you have various degrees of protection, the same with marine protected areas. So I want you to imagine the difference between Dartmoor National Park and the Serengeti National Park in Africa. So in Dartmoor National Park, we describe that as a national park, but the Royal Marines are allowed to do exercises on there. People are allowed to drive their cars through there. There's some farming there. There's a prison there. It's protected, but the level of protection is very, very low. Imagine something like the Serengeti, where it is on the other end of the spectrum where it's a true wilderness area. Yes, still impacted by, obviously, by climate change, but it's trying to protect a whole wilderness area. That's what we're trying to do down in Antarctica. You asked me about the level of protection which we have in the United Kingdom. Take a deep breath. In the waters around the United Kingdom, we have 7 square kilometers. The 7 square kilometers is fully protected. It's not even woefully inadequate. It's, for a country which has such a strong maritime heritage, for a country which has the resources which the United Kingdom has, and for a country which has such incredible waters around it and so much biodiversity, to be only fully protecting 7 square kilometers when we know what's happening to the oceans is criminal.
Criminal is the word that springs to mind.
Mm.
Do they work? Do marine protected areas work? What evidence have you seen for the difference that when something is designated a marine protected area, what it means to the biosphere within that area?
Oh, it makes such an enormous difference. A few years ago, I did a swim in the Red Sea. I was swimming down this coastline, and it was literally barren underneath me. I then entered a marine protected area, and suddenly there was this coral, beautiful fish of all different colors of description. The life was absolutely vibrant. Marine protected areas work. They not only protect what's actually inside them, but that flourishes, it recovers. The fish then go into outside the marine protected areas, so it's also good for the fishing community. Marine protected areas, really, I can't sing for them high enough. They really work. And, sometimes you find fishing communities who are against them.
Mm.
Marine protected areas are fishermen's friends. If we carry on the way we're going, there will be absolutely nothing left in our oceans. I've seen this, and so have all the fishermen. We just got to face the truth right now.
And we haven't got long.
No, we haven't got long. I mean, so I'm living in Cape Town at the moment. I described that first swim when I looked back and all those beautiful African penguins all over the beach. Okay, so their numbers have dropped. So at the turn of the last century, in 1900, there were over 1 million pairs of African penguins. Today, they're 22,000. Okay? And in the Western Cape, so around Cape Town, they're expected to go extinct in just 10 years.
Oh, my word.
And it's 3 things which are causing this. And we've got solutions to all 3 things. So the first is serious overfishing. Everywhere, serious overfishing. The second is obviously climate change. And the third is pollution, and especially plastic pollution. But in the case of penguins, it's oil pollution. You get a shipwreck, spills oil, it can decimate a whole penguin colony, within days. You'll wipe out a whole entire penguin colony.
I know last week you were releasing penguins. How did that go? What was the point of that initiative?
Well, it was the 20-year anniversary of the biggest animal rescue in history, which took place off Robben Island 20 years ago. So a ship called the Treasure sank. It spilt oil. The oil then went ashore. An organization called SANCOB, which is a rescue center in Cape Town, started picking up the penguins. On the first day, they had 100. On the second day, they had 1,000. On the third day, suddenly they had 3,000. They cleaned in total 20,000 penguins. And then they did, for the first time ever in history, they started removing penguins which weren't oiled. They picked them up, they put them on trucks, and then they drove them all the way to the Eastern Cape, all the way to Port Elizabeth. This was a huge decision to make. I mean, here you've got an animal which is endangered, and you're taking them and you're driving them about 850 kilometers up the coast, and you're releasing them, okay, in the water there, in the hope that they will survive there away from the oil. Anyway, they just didn't have the capacity to look after all these penguins, because now suddenly they had 40,000 penguins to look after. They drove 20,000 up to the Eastern Cape. You know what happened? A few weeks later, they had all swum back, but by the time they arrived back, the cleanup operation was complete. It was the most amazing animal rescue in history, and just shows what people can do. Because 45,000 people from Cape Town and from around the world. People came from all over the world to help. 45,000 people cleaned these 20,000 penguins. And I can tell you something about a penguin. They've got sharp beaks, and they're not always very, very grateful to be cleaned and to have all the oil taken off them. So it was a really arduous task, but an amazing one. They saved that animal from extinction. But we are still in a very, very serious situation.
Let's come to the politics, Lewis. As I said in the introduction, you are United Nations Patron of the Ocean. You stand alongside two other people, one of whom I think is Ben Fogle, who's United Nations Patron for wilderness.
Yes.
And is it Kirsty? Forgive me, I've forgotten the name.
So there are four patrons. There's Ben Fogle for wilderness areas, myself for the oceans, Christine Tompkins. She's an amazing lady, and she has, together with her husband Doug, who started the company Patagonia, they decided to buy some old farmlands down in Patagonia. They bought them, they have rewilded them, they've created these national parks and handed them to the people of Chile and Argentina. A true inspiration, and a very straight-talking lady.
Yeah.
Just gets things done. No talking, just get the job done. And the last one is Slava Fetisov, the Russian, who's now the patron of the polar regions.
So let's come to the politics. Thank you for the heads up. I should have done better research. I apologize. You have this position you do these swims, that raises awareness, you get fantastic media coverage. You have the role as United Nations Patron of the Ocean, which I guess opens doors to you. So you say you're just waiting for China and Russia. Tell us a success story first. When you've met a president or a prime minister or an environmental minister and you've done the pitch, and they say, I get it absolutely, and here's a success story. Can you tell us a success story? And then we'll come to Russia and China.
Yeah, I suppose the biggest success story was the Ross Sea. So just to explain where the Ross Sea is, if you sail from the bottom of New Zealand and you sail from 40 degrees south to 50 to 60 to 70, eventually on the horizon, you'll see the mountains of Victoria Land in Antarctica. The Ross Sea is the last true wilderness left on this earth. I want you to imagine emperor penguins sliding and tobogganing on their stomachs. I want you to imagine huge, great humpback whales coming out of the water, skuas in the air. It's a truly amazing place. But this is where now the big fishing fleets were coming. And so there was a call for 17 years to try and create a marine protected area in there. It didn't work. I just had the gut feel that if I did a swim down there and I went to Russia and I urged the Russian government to take action, President Putin would hear me. So I went down there and I did a swim. And during that swim, when I came out, my cameraman took a photograph, which was unbelievable. It was me coming out the water. And just to explain how cold this water is, the water is minus 1.7, so it's below zero, okay? And the air temperature is minus 37. So you take your hand out of minus 1.7 and you put it into minus 37. After the first minute, my fingers were so cold, but all my fingers had turned completely white. By the end of the second minute, I couldn't feel my hands. After the end of the third minute, I was losing control of my arms. I thought to myself, if I don't get out right now, I will never, ever see Moscow. Anyway, my cameraman took this picture, and it's of me lying in the bottom of a boat as they're taking me back from the swim to the main boat to reheat me. I'm completely frozen. I'm just staring at the cameraman. There's ice all over me. And it's just a terrifying looking image. Anyway, went on the front pages of many Russian newspapers. I then went from there to Russia. I arrived there, and it was Slava Fetisov, this man who would then come with me now down to Antarctica a few months ago, who met me, and he said, I want to help you, Lewis. And then he explained his past to me. He said, Lewis, he said, I'm a Russian ice hockey player, but I was a defender. He said, we need more defenders and protectors in this world. And so he then kindly agreed to take me to the Minister of the Environment, to the Minister of Defense. He then took me to President Putin's advisor on environmental issues. And for a period of 2 years, I went backwards and forwards, meeting them and starting the negotiations. and starting the discussions about Russia signing. China also hadn't signed. John Kerry, the Secretary of State of America, got China across the line. So it was just Russia who still had to agree. And then in 2016, I got a WhatsApp message from Slava saying, Russia is going to sign. And I'll never, ever forget that moment, because it was everything I had worked for, and it had been unrelenting. And then finally, all the nations who are responsible for governing Antarctica had agreed to protect it. It's the largest protected area in the world. It's the size of the United Kingdom, France, Germany, and Italy all put together. And you would think that I'm satisfied, and I was really happy. But I just want more, and I want more because we're now in a race against time, Paul.
Exactly. What does more look like? What would give us a 5-year view? You say 10 years we lose South African penguins. What does a 5-year this looks good view look, and what is required to get us over the line? And more importantly, you're just one man who's made such a difference. Everybody watches, the appalling photographs and film footage we've seen of garbage on beaches after beaches were allowed to be, people go on here in the UK, Bournemouth and so on, and the garbage left on beaches afterwards. What can we, the sort of engaged but feel disempowered, do to support you, to lobby our governments, to assist the United Nations?
Well, there are 3 big issues which we're facing now. It's serious overfishing, it's pollution, so much plastic pollution. Everywhere I go, whether it's the Arctic or the Antarctic, and everywhere in between, I'm seeing plastic pollution, and it has such a devastating impact on the oceans. And then the third thing is obviously climate change. And the solution is very, very simple. When it comes to overfishing, we've got to realize, we've got to understand that the oceans are resilient, but they're not indestructible. And we are overfishing our oceans. We need to have marine protected areas. The scientists are saying that we need to protect at least 30% now by 2030. At the moment, in terms of full protection, it's about 1 or 2%. So we've got an awful long way to go in a very, very short period of time. In terms of plastic pollution, the second issue, please, I urge people, when you see plastic, when people offer you single-use plastic, please just turn it away. There's no place now for plastic pollution. One thing that really worries me about this lockdown is the very bad habits we're getting into. On the beaches here in Cape Town now, I'm beginning to see, the masks and gloves and things like this. Yes, I understand we're in a pandemic, but please, let's not destroy the environment in our desire also to protect ourselves. And then the last thing is obviously climate change. It's happening so quickly. Just to give you an understanding of the speed it's happening. When I did my first swim in the Arctic, the water on the island of Spitsbergen, which is very, very close to the North Pole, the water was 3 degrees centigrade. I went back there a few years ago. The water was no longer 3 degrees. It's now 10 degrees centigrade in summer. So it's gone from 3 degrees to 10 degrees in just 12 years. That's the speed at which it's happening. And we need to take action, and we need to take it really quickly. And when world leaders say, well, I'm not sure that we can do this, what we have shown in the pandemic is that when we need to take action, we can take it. There is no excuse now for all of us, or every country, every business, every family, all of us understand that we all have a role now to protect the environment and to stem the tide of this plastic pollution and to really take serious action on climate change. And if we don't, our children will not have a future. It's that simple.
It's that simple and that vital. I remember a friend and I once flying a helicopter up from Nairobi back to the UK. We stopped on a little sort of sandy atoll in the middle of the Red Sea. It was hot. We went to get a swim, and it sounds crazy. We both stepped out of the helicopter and then got right back in. This little sandy atoll, just big enough, size of a tennis court, to land a helicopter on, middle of the Red Sea, completely covered in syringes, light bulbs, plastic bags. And this is 25 years ago. I dread to think, it's so awful now. So let's talk a little bit about the last book you had, which is some years ago, but it's how you and I first met. 21 Yaks and a Speedo. I understand the Speedo, you're a swimmer. 21 Yaks, please explain, Lewis.
Yes. Do you remember at the time everyone was looking sort of for catchy titles? Who Moved My Cheese, 50 Shades of Grey. I decided to write a book. So initially, I'd written a book called Achieving the Impossible, which was a sort of life story. And then afterwards, publishers came up to me and they said, Lewis, would you write a book about the life lessons you've learned? And so I wrote the book, and it was 21 short stories. So it was designed, please forgive me, it was designed for men, okay? In the sense of, this is a short, sharp story with a lesson at the end, a punch at the end. And for people who don't have a lot of time on their hands, which is, and so I wrote the book. We then went to go and agree what the title was going to be. They said, "What is it?" I said, "It's 21 short stories." They said, "Where did you get the idea for this?" I said, "I really got the idea when I was climbing up Everest to do a swim. So I was walking next to this enormous, great yak. So we had to take a boat up Everest." And so we had taken a boat and put it on the back of various yaks, and we were carrying it up Everest. And this is where the idea came from. And the lady who was the publishing director, she said, "That's great. 21 yaks and a Speedo."
I'm just going to say this. I think you're wrong. You may have written it for men. Those were the times. Perhaps times have changed now. I have given this to so many goddaughters, nieces, female members of my family, because the bottom line is, it's the principles, simple and effective principles to help people achieve the impossible. And as a white male, and at the time in which we are living, I'm realizing that although I do not come from a privileged background, I realize that my skin and my gender has accorded me privileges that I've been hitherto unaware of. And I have to say this, Lewis, your book is as pertinent to any member of the human race as it is to white men such as you and I, because there are people trying to achieve their impossibles, and the lessons apply to them as well. It's a hell of a book, and it sort of stood the test of time. Okay, here we go. We're coming towards the end, but there are a couple of questions I want to ask you. Greta Thunberg is doing in her way sort of what you are doing in your way. Are you a fan of hers? Have you met her? Would you want to meet her? Because it strikes me that there are lots of people doing disparate things in disparate ways, but united, you could be a really strong force for change.
So I've never met her. Yes, I'd love to. I'd love to meet her. When you become an environmental campaigner, you've got to make a decision. Just as if you're interested in politics, you've got to make a decision, or if you're interested in business, need to make a decision. So in business, do you want to work for a big firm? Do you want to work for a small firm? Do you want to work on your own? If you're in politics, so you're interested in the left wing of politics or the right wing. On environmental issues, do you, on the one hand, want to be a real activist? Do you want to be Extinction Rebellion? Do you want to be Sea Shepherd? Or do you want to be on the other side? Let's say, for example, working with WWF in a big organization that's trying to persuade business to change. It's a very, very broad spectrum, and you need to work out where you feel comfortable along the line. The one thing about Greta is that Greta has decided, the way she talks is very direct, very, very powerful. And and a lot of people can relate to it. It's also quite divisive. A lot of people feel very, very threatened by it. With the type of work which I do, so I meet heads of state, I meet business leaders, I meet environment ministers. Speaking in that type of way probably wouldn't work for me. You probably wouldn't get an audience, certainly not in Russia. So it wouldn't be it wouldn't be an appropriate method for me to do my environmental campaigning, but I respect every single person on this whole spectrum, and all of us have got a role to play. Yes, I certainly think that all of us could work together a lot more. One needs to work out where one feels actually comfortable.
Yeah, that's well put. Last, and sort of edging towards the final question. I've never asked you, and forgive me if this is impertinent of me, but I know you're not a wealthy man. How do you fund this? How do you attract the money to do this? And where does the money go?
So there are three ways I'm able to fund this work. So I've created a foundation, the Lewis Pugh Foundation, and a number of companies have been very generous and foundations have been very generous in helping finance that. It's an ongoing task. It's incredibly difficult now. especially during the lockdown, to be able to raise a sponsorship. The second way is through writing books. And then the third way is giving speeches to businesses. Those are the three ways I'm able to run these campaigns, which are extremely expensive. You go down to Antarctica, you spend a long period of time there, then you go off to Russia or to any other part of the world, and you do campaigns. It's expensive.
Yeah, I understand that. You have a map behind you, I can see, behind the virtual studio wall. I'm sorry, I've just realized that it's not visible on screen to other people. Of the English Channel, I did mention that you swum the channel lengthways. I believe you were the first person to do so. Is that right?
It had been done by somebody in a wetsuit who was going the other way. So I went from Land's End to Dover. There was a man called Ross Edgley who swam around Britain, but in a wetsuit. People may say, well, there's not a big difference between the two. There is a big significant difference just because of how cold you get. The wetsuit also creates a buoyancy. But lastly, jellyfish.
Yeah.
I'll never, ever forget swimming across Lyme Bay, which is an enormous great bay. It's about 90 kilometers from one side to the other side. And every single day I was swimming through swarms of jellyfish getting stung all over. That's not to say that swimming in a wetsuit also isn't a very, very tough challenge, but swimming it as the way that Captain Matthew Webb and all the other swimmers had gone across the English Channel, I felt that was the right way to swim the length of the English Channel.
You remind me of something weirdly. There used to be burned into a door lintel in Stirling Lines in Hereford a phrase, pain is just weakness leaving the body. How do you deal with the pain of a jellyfish when you are swimming through a swarm of them and you're cold and you're exhausted? Can you give us an insight into what the mental state is that allows you to do that?
Well, two things about a jellyfish. The first is that if you get stung too many times, you can get an anaphylactic shock, okay? And you can die. So I've had friends who've been attempting to swim between Cuba and Florida, and they'd be stung by box jellyfish. And if they didn't get out, they would be dead. So this is not a question about how much pain you can endure. One has to be very, very careful. The other thing that happens is that a jellyfish never, ever stings you, on your toe. It always stings you right in the face or in the groin. And it is such a shock when you go into a big, patch of jellyfish. And you've got to be very careful that you don't actually get a spasm in your leg or your shoulder or tear a muscle because it's such a shock. But then you've got to control your mind and you've got to say, okay, just be careful, keep on swimming. And then my team, some of them are at the top of the mast of the boat, they look out and now they're trying to find a way through this patch of jellyfish into clear water again. And eventually you will get to clear water. You just got to put one stroke in front of the next and just keep on going.
Here's the final question. I described you as an aquanaut in the introduction. And I think you are, if I haven't said it before, I'm going to call you, and you can use it, the world's finest, foremost aquanaut. I happen to know very recently you were talking to an astronaut. Can you tell us why you were talking to an astronaut, what the NASA tie-up was, and how did it go?
Yes, so this was with a lady called Jessica Mayers. So Jessica's just come back from the International Space Station. She started life out as a marine biologist, and she had done a PhD in the Ross Sea on emperor penguins. And I'm busy making a film now, and the producers wanted me to interview her. It was absolutely fascinating to hear her journey. One thing really struck, somebody who is an astronaut has obviously been through such a very, very rigorous selection process. And she explained that she had tried 3 times and failed, and then gone back and on the 4th time been selected. And so I think that's my sort of final message. My first book was called Achieving the Impossible. You just got to keep on going. You got to keep knocking on the door. Eventually, it will open.
Fine words for all of us. Lewis, thank you so much for being so generous with your time and with your answers. and for trying to get us to do the right thing. I'm very grateful to you for joining us here at Lockdown LitFest. It's such a pleasure, as always, to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Lewis Pugh, United Nations Patron of the Oceans. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's Lewis Pugh. If you haven't heard of him before, you have now. There's plenty of footage on his fantastic website, lewispugh.com. If you have deep pockets, do get in touch with him about the Lewis Pugh Foundation. It really does make a difference. It really does. And by God, do we need to make a difference right now. His book is called 21 Yaks and a Speedo. It's a great way, as we've discussed, of helping you to achieve the impossible, whatever battles you face, whatever challenges or commitments you have set to yourself. It's a fantastic, not quite a how-to guide, but an inspirational guide to do it. As ever, we're still in the midst of this pandemic. So from all of us at Lockdown LitFest, we all wish you well. We hope you're keeping safe. We hope you're being careful. And we hope that you are loving the people that love you. Thank you very much for joining us. Cheerio.